Hello, everybody. I wanted to introduce Francis, who will be joining me today to talk about rowing, about coming out, and about getting naked for Barefoot Man. Stay tuned. Welcome to Talking Barefoot. Thank you for joining me today. It's so lovely to see you in one piece.
Yeah, nice to see you too. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. And to see you back from Africa, where it sounds like you ended up in a lot of pieces in a lot of places. But we
Absolutely.
will come on to that. I think the headline for everybody is you're going to be one of the breakout stars in the 2025 Barefoot Man calendar. So
I hope so.
Super delighted about that. And without further ado, let's get into it. Tell me, Francis, tell me a little bit about you.
So rowing has been a part of me for a really long time, actually. So I first discovered it when I was about 14. I wasn't very good at any other sports. And in the beginning, I didn't take it entirely seriously, but I found that it was quite fun and different, and I was able to do it with my friends. And then I built up to row for Great Britain at junior level in my final year at school, which was the first sort of taste of an international stage, which made me a bit hungry for more, as it went on through as I went into university even. Rowing had at that point become quite a big part of my life. And I went to university at Durham. And while I was at Durham, I also rowed for GB as an under-23 level. So that was in my final year of Durham in 2014. And beyond that, I decided to try and pursue it to attempt to make the Olympic squad. So I moved to Henley-on-Thames and started rowing out of Leander Club. A lot of people will have heard of Leander Club. It ends up...
I've been there.
Yeah. It ends up kind of being a feeder squad for the Olympic team quite a lot of the time and for the GB team. And I trained there for about 3 years. I was very successful there. We had some really good races, some excellent regattas abroad, internationally, etc. But then, unfortunately, I got a back injury in my lower back. And so I had to take a bit of time out. One of my discs was not in the right place. And after about a year and a half of rehab, when I came back to the sport, unfortunately, a lot of other people had moved on. So they were at a different level to where I had been before. And that meant that I had to kind of be realistic at that point and decide whether or not the Olympic dream was going to happen for me. And I made the very hard decision to step away from the sport full time and into the working world. And while rowing has never sort of become something that I've forgotten, it's definitely not as big a part of my life anymore.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there and rewind a little bit because you've covered quite a lot. Can I ask, because I know, and I think a lot of people associate rowing with a certain degree of privilege. So was there something about the school that you went to that gave you this opportunity?
I was at a private school, so I was very lucky to have parents who were able to do that for me or put me through that. And yes, so rowing is generally quite a privileged sport. The boats are quite expensive in order to travel to the locations that we have to race. Usually, sometimes those were abroad, so that ends up being quite expensive as well. So I was very lucky to have been able to do a sport or find a sport at a school that my parents were able to send me to that I actually loved. Because I think if I'd gone to another school or if rowing hadn't been an option, I'm not sure I'd have found the love for exercise that I have today.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but I get the impression from my friends who work at British Rowing, who have been long-time supporters of this project, by the way, which is amazing, and I love that. I know that British Rowing is making big strides to try to make the sport more inclusive and more accessible to kids in what we would call state education, which Americans would call public schools, which is confusing for us because public schools are private schools where we are.
For us, exactly.
Yeah.
There is a big drive at the moment across most of GB rowing in particular, but also just generally as a grassroots participation. So it's not just the sort of the higher level clubs trying to get more people involved. It's actually all the clubs around the country trying to open up their doors and welcome more people in. There is definitely a drive to make rowing more inclusive, and that's not something that's going to happen quickly, but hopefully something that is pursued and is successful in the end.
Well, I mean, the cost of rowing is kind of a very large part of why we're sitting here talking today. As you know, I started a calendar back in 2009 with a university rowing team. The primary motivation for them was that they didn't have enough funding to be competitive at university level. But you went to Durham University, which I believe was actually fairly well funded in rowing. Is that true?
As far as I'm aware, I wasn't privy to the decision-making processes, but we definitely seemed to be okay. It's all to do with success. I think if you are doing well at the university, there is obviously more ability to get funding.
I have to say that back in my Warwick days, Durham was the dream. It was like you guys had the support, you had the funding, you had the coaches, and the university, I think, recognizes the value to its brand.
Yes.
Of having success in rowing. And I remember, you mentioned Leander earlier, and a former president of Leander, who was also the Chancellor of Warwick University, told me how much he believed that rowing was an asset to a university's reputation and prestige, really. And I know that for the Warwick guys, that was part of their mission. And of course, we then started Sport Allies, and there was a whole story behind what we were doing, which was about diversity and inclusion. And in some ways, the reason I wanted to talk about the perception of rowing is that, in a way, if you want to talk about diversity and inclusion, rowing might not be where you would start.
Not necessarily, and I think historically it's always been sort of there's this image that people conjure in their heads of what rowing is. So generally, rowing is in the public eye for two reasons, especially in the UK. It's either for the Oxford-Cambridge boat race or for the Olympics, and otherwise, for the majority of the time, people kind of forget it's a sport unless you're involved in it, which is a shame. And that's why I think the push to include more people and open it up to more opportunities and allow more people to access these clubs I just think it's really important. I
didn't discover rowing until I was in my mid-40s, and I came at it from a slightly unusual angle. But I certainly was. I was absolutely rubbish at sport at school, and rugby was what was on offer to me, and I was not cut out to be a rugby player, really.
I bet.
So it was quite funny in the end that Warwick Rowers became how I joined a sports team. After Durham, it was at Durham or after Durham, you decided to seriously commit.
Yes. So when it got to the end of university, I wasn't quite ready to start a real job. And I had really enjoyed my rowing journey, and I had not been as successful as I'd wanted to be at the GB Under-23 regatta that I had been selected for. So I felt like I had a bit of unfinished business, and I wanted to give myself the opportunity to see what I could do with that. So I joined Leander, and I joined Leander with a few of my friends from university. So it felt like more of an easy transition. We all kind of moved down together, lived together for a while. And when I made that move, I joined a very strong squad, and I was very lucky to row with some of the people who actually in this Olympics and the previous Olympics won medals. So I was kind of very much at the top of my game, and they were at the top of their game. And it got to a point where I thought, this is kind of happening. I did well at some of the GB trial systems along the way. I kind of started to make a bit of a name for myself, and then unfortunately, I sustained a back injury. To this day, I don't really know how it happened. Rowing is a bit of a repetitive sport, and it was in my lower spine. My L3, L4 disc in my lower spine actually it bulged out of position. It was slipped, so herniated and slipped out of position. So I was in a lot of pain. I wasn't able to train as I wanted, and I had to rehab it. And I had a great physio through Leander who helped me get better, but it took a really long time, just like most rehabilitation. So at that point, I looked at everything logically, and I said that this isn't going to happen for me. What I can do is stay involved in rowing in a different way, and I'm going to step aside and try and build a career. Because at that point,
if I can jump in for a moment, Francis, because I think what a lot of people won't really understand, but which I've kind of had the privilege of seeing at every level, actually, is how much of a commitment it is to compete in rowing at a really elite level.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, you're not my first guy from Leander. We had 3 guys when we relaunched as Worldwide Rower in 2020. We did a shoot at a rowing at the Albert Docks in London, where they have a rowing place. There was an inclusive rowing club that was rowing out of there, as well as some other clubs that some of the Warwick Rowers were involved in.
Yeah.
And we approached British Rowing, who approached Team GB athletes, and we had 3 guys who came from Leander, who I think you actually know them, don't you?
I do, yeah. They're good friends, yeah. They all. I saw the process. I've been aware of the Warwick Rowers, Barefoot Man, and now Sport Allies. I've been aware, and Worldwide Raw, all the way through that process. To be honest, like I've always known. I think, especially when Warwick Rowers started, I was still at university myself, so it was something that sort of was I was aware of, and so I've seen that transition all the way through. So I knew that my friends were taking part in that when it became Worldwide Raw. So
I have to get you to dish here and spill some tea, Francis. What were university rowers at other clubs making of what the Warwick Rowers were doing?
I think we were all aware of it. I was aware of it. I had some friends who were actually at Warwick at the time. So
that's right. You told me that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so it's really quite. It was seen as. I mean, it was a really cool way for the club to try and make some extra funds to be able to compete at a stronger level. And I think any opportunity that you're given in order to improve performance, why not take it?
I do remember once we set up Sport Allies, we did some research because we wanted an evidence base for what we were doing, because our message was to be challenging homophobia in sport and make sport more inclusive. The whole point really of Warwick Rowers was that we were saying we are guys who don't mind. We embrace the idea that gay guys should be in sport. We want gay guys to be in sport, and hopefully this is making you feel a little bit more welcome. And I remember at this House of Commons launch that we had for this evidence base that we'd created for Sport Allies, the chief exec of British Rowing at the time, he was there, and I was like, I'm so happy that you guys came along. And he said, Angus, just between us, so I'm slightly oversharing here maybe, but he said, rowing isn't necessarily seen as a terribly cool, inclusive sport, and you make us look like we are cool and inclusive. So, I'm very happy about that, and I'm glad that other rowers at other universities saw it as a positive thing that we were doing.
I feel like it's really important just in any sport, particularly today, where there is more, people are generally more open. Sport still kind of feels fairly closed, certainly at a high level. I mean, if you look at football in particular, there are definitely going to be more gay football players in the professional leagues than are currently out, and that is probably something to do with how they don't feel welcome, or they don't feel included, or they don't feel they can be. And that's just football. Yeah. There are lots of other sports that would have similar experiences, and I think it's more important than ever to really make people aware that they can be who they want to be, especially in sport. And actually, this most recent Olympics, it was really nice to see that the LGBTQ athletes were more open and were able to be more themselves, I think, than any other Olympics I've ever seen or I've ever experienced. And that journey needs to continue, and with sort of drives like Barefoot Man are pushing, then that is something that hopefully will continue. And will become much more inclusive as we grow, as you guys grow, and as people we all grow as well, and realise that actually it's okay to be who you are. Really.
Absolutely. Well, and you're here helping us to grow, and I love that. And you yourself identify as LGBT, right?
Indeed, yes. Something that I struggled with a lot, actually, in my own journey. So I came out very late. I actually didn't realise until much later, which I think maybe might have been to do with sort of pushing away feelings, but I wasn't comfortable with myself, and I think actually sport exacerbated that a little bit. Not that I don't think any of the friends that I had from university, any of the friends I had later at Leander, I don't actually think any of them would have had an issue. But when you're in the mix of it, it's really hard to actually convince yourself of that. And until I started actually saying it to my closest friends and realizing that they weren't going to abandon me, that was when it became apparent that I could be who I wanted to be, and it would be okay. And even if some people did slip away, as I started coming out, they were obviously not people I would have wanted in my life anyway. So for me, the process of coming out was quite long, and it was quite fraught. But I also wouldn't kind of change it, because I feel like the way that I went through that journey has made me who I am. It's made me more confident in myself now, because I'm more sure of myself. And I think if I'd kind of forced that earlier, I might have become a more anxious individual or a more worried individual. I think it took me a long time to come to terms with it. Now I have, and I'm happy. I'm very happy.
Well, congratulations! I'm delighted that you are, and as somebody who's been on that journey myself, although I feel I was on a very different journey, because it was kind of pretty obvious to everyone from the age of 4 that I was a raging queen. It is a tough journey. And I think you're absolutely right to say that the people who are of value in your life kind of self-select.
I think that was the thing I was most scared of. I was most scared of telling my closest friends, because they're the ones whose opinion I valued the most, and most scared of telling my family. And while there were some who took a little bit of time to sort of adjust, I didn't lose anyone that I really, really cared about. The people that I really wanted to be okay with it were okay with it. And as far as I'm aware, no one ever said anything negative. I mean, maybe behind my back they have, but as far as I'm aware, everyone was very positive and happy that I was willing and able to be myself. And some people told me that they'd known for ages, which then made me sort of go back in on myself a little bit, like, oh, how did they tell? What was I doing?
Right.
Questioning stuff again, like how could I have changed that? How could I have made sure they wouldn't have known? But then by that point, they did, so I didn't have to worry about that anymore. But it took a while to sort of even think to sort of transition away from that kind of fear. So realizing that actually, once I had told people, it was okay to just be myself. And while I don't announce it in the streets, I don't run around shouting it. I'm much more comfortable in myself in any social situation. If someone asks me, because quite often I get asked if I have a girlfriend, because I don't present.
Oh, God.
I don't present. I don't present as stereotypically gay, which is, I think stereotypes are completely incorrect anyway. But a lot of people, unfortunately, still have those in their head from old TV shows, movies, from magazines and what they've read in the past. So while I don't believe those stereotypes are correct, people do assume. So I do find that I still have to come out even now. But because I'm so comfortable with it, it doesn't worry me as much. So it's been quite a journey, and it's still sort of, I'm always in this journey. You're always part of it, and it's good fun. Like I like being able to kind of surprise people sometimes. Be like, actually, no, it's a boyfriend I have actually, or no, I like guys, and sometimes it throws them. You can see it throws them just for a moment. And then they realize where they are, and that they're generally okay with it. It's just a surprise sometimes.
I want to pick up on something that you mentioned, which is, I suppose, what we might call tells, because I think a lot of us, whether we're LGB or T or Q or I or whatever, we have to learn to live in a world that doesn't feel hospitable, and we hide and we do everything we can not to basically show our hands, as it were, not to have what gamblers would call a tell.
Yeah.
I was never straight passing, as I said earlier, so it was never as much of a challenge for me, although my relatives would always ask me if I had a girlfriend, you know. And it wasn't until I remember going back to Ireland one time, and I was working at the Terence Higgins Trust, and my relatives would say, "So what are you doing?" I said, "I'm working on a public health campaign for men who have sex with men." And I thought, I feel like that should really stop with the girlfriend question.
They should be able to tell.
You should figure it out from that. And to be fair, most of them, with one notable exception, were like, "Good for you."
Yeah.
Were you conscious of having to kind of hide parts of yourself, having to watch the tells? Because it sounds like when people said, yeah, we knew, that was slightly triggering for you. I'd like to explore that a little.
Yeah, it was slightly triggering. I mean, I feel like I am because I still get asked now, you know, do you have a girlfriend? I feel like I am quite straight passing, which in some ways is frustrating, but in some ways does allow me to sort of access, I think, more spaces than some other LGBTQ people can, or I feel more comfortable in some of those spaces because I don't necessarily feel like someone might be judging me necessarily, which I feel very lucky that I haven't had to experience that in a way, but also because I realized later and because I started coming out to my friends much later, there was probably a couple of years before I started telling people that I was aware and then I was hyper aware of trying to sort of minimize any possibility of anyone finding out. So it wasn't a pleasant sort of world to live in when you're kind of aware that you're not your full self, you're not allowing your full self into anyone to see who you really are, because you're always guarding that one little bit, which actually is a big bit, but you're convincing yourself it's a little bit and that you can make do and you can be okay and you'll be okay if no one ever finds out. But that bit gets smaller and you realize that you're actually making your personality and who you want to be and the best parts of yourself, you're sort of pressing down, because, you know, as soon as I started telling people, I became more confident, I became more self-aware, I became more open and friendly and happy. And there was this part that I'd always sort of been pushing down that my friends could now see. I was much more relaxed, and I wasn't having to guard anymore. And I know that there are so many people who experience that in a far worse way than I did, especially if they are not as straight passing or trying to hide more tells potentially. But yeah, I feel like I kind of wish I'd realized sooner, just for my own personal journey, but the way I did and the friends that I've had to support me and the network I've had around me as I figured myself out, I wouldn't change them for the world. Like, they've been amazing. So yeah.
Well, that's amazing. So were you still heavily involved in rowing at the time that you kind of came to terms with being LGBT?
I was, so it was a couple of years after sort of, yes. So in the last bit of time when I was at Leander, I was aware, but I was very much trying to kind of close it down. While I know that the people who I was rowing with day in and day out, today I can tell myself, right, they wouldn't have had a problem with me. When you're in it, you feel like they might just change their behaviours a little bit. They might not want to go into the shared showers with you anymore. They might not want to chat in the changing rooms. They might not want to do your weight sets with you. You convince yourself of all of these things because you have, ultimately, I was hiding a bit of myself from them. So it wasn't just worried about what they would think about me being gay. It was actually worried about what I thought they might say about me lying or hiding something from them for so long. So it was a sort of catch-22 situation where I probably was ready to start telling some people, but I couldn't. I felt like I couldn't because sport is ultimately this quite macho man world, and I didn't want to suddenly not be allowed into that world. And it was only really when I stepped away from the full-time rowing that I started being like, right, okay, this is something I can start telling people. And I am still involved in rowing now to a different degree. We'll talk about that shortly. But I do actually think stepping away from the day in, day out, daily grind of rowing that allowed me to be ready to come out, which is sad. I kind of wish. It speaks to the story of sport sort of limiting some of the people in this world, in the LGBTQ world. I hope that the future gets better for anyone else involved in sport. I know it is already better for some. Like, I have friends who are out in lots of different sports now, and are much more comfortable and okay with it, and people have no problem. But when you're in it, you can't see that. And even the most famous of GB Olympians who may have been forced to come out before they were ready, have probably experienced similar things when they were going through their own journey. So,
well, it vindicates. I mean, your story vindicates something that I think I always wanted to do in the Warwick Rowers project, and which the rowers got on board with and really supported. Because you mentioned being nervous about, would these guys want to be in the showers with me anymore, to be in the changing rooms, because you're in a single sex space, which is based on the principle that everybody in that space is heterosexual. That's the assumption and the assertion, actually, in that space. And it's one of the things that I struggled with, because I felt that sport at school was used to establish heterosexuality as the only acceptable way of being. And everything about the sport was about reinforcing, first of all, the roles of men and the roles of women, but also the lack of any alternative to heterosexuality. And I felt that sport was so much involved in that. And I love the idea that, and I know this for a fact, that quite a lot of men who have come out later in life have, in some ways, how can I put it? I don't want to say the Warwick Rowers changed the world, because we didn't. But for the men who were struggling with their sexuality, the Warwick Rowers project gave them an opportunity to look at men and think about how they felt about those men. And it was sort of a safe space, because we've always been quite careful in the project not to be a sexual content creator. We don't do sexual content, but we do nudity, and as you discovered not that long ago, we do full nudity. We don't shy away from showing things. It's just that our calendar is made to be a kind of safe product for social spaces, where your granny can have it in her kitchen, for example, and nobody's going to freak out. But our project has been about men's bodies being seen, and about other people being able to see those bodies on their terms, because too often men's bodies are seen on the terms of the men themselves. Sometimes, not infrequently, it's an imposition. You've got people sending unsolicited dick pics. You've got flashers. You've got, I guess the unsolicited dick pic is the new version of the flasher. I'm just such an old boomer. I still, what we did was we said, these are sportsmen. They're naked. You can look at them. You can see everything just as you would in a changing room, and they know that you are gay, and they're okay with that. And by the way, also, if you're a woman, they're okay with that. You're probably not going to be in the changing room, but they're still okay with it. And I love that. I recently did a kind of like a 90-day online program with a group of men, a lot of whom were coming to terms with their sexuality later in life. And about half of them were like, "Are you that guy? Are you the Warwick Rowers guy?" And it's, "Oh yeah, I am." And I thought I was going to get a lot of hate, because I thought you're saying, like, because sometimes people are a bit weird about it. Like, you have the best job in the world. It's like, no. I have the ability to walk into Harrods and not try anything on. So I'm not sure how good that is. But these guys were like, oh, you don't know how much it helped me that I was able to look at the stuff that you produced in that project. And that's what I want to continue doing. Because as you said, we've got to make sport feel like a comfortable space for everyone.
I think openness leads to discussion, and discussion is what leads to change. And I think ultimately that's what you have been able to start with the project, and hopefully will continue with it. That being open and giving the opportunity for people to show themselves, all of themselves, part of themselves, then leads to and prompts people to discuss that sort of openness, and that then you have conversations about inclusive spaces, and you have conversations about how to make places more inclusive, and then that leads to the actual physical change, which we're seeing, day in, day out as the modern world catches up. Because unfortunately, it has not always been welcoming to LGBTQ people.
Well, even the Paris opening ceremony, there was controversy over some of the stuff that was seen as being too woke. We had issues.
The big buzzword at the moment, isn't it? Woke.
Oh gosh, don't even. It's like, why would you want to be? The opposite of being woke is being asleep. Okay. But I remember there was the problem over the tableau that was actually about Dionysus and Greek gods, and it was a reference to the Olympics, but it was actually seen as being a reference to the Last Supper, and then of course the big to-do over the female boxer who was misgendered by critics, who are now facing criminal prosecution in France.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important for the world to have seen sort of those discussions become more mainstream, because you realise what people actually have to struggle with on a daily basis that you might not be aware of in any other way. So I think while it's obviously awful, while it's sometimes awful, it's important that these stories are shared more widely.
I completely agree with you, and I'm very glad that you have become a part of sharing our story. I mean, you registered with because we have at Barefoot Man, for people who don't already know, there's a registration page where you can go and sign up to say, I would be interested in taking part in a shoot. And you did that. So tell me a little bit about that, Francis.
Oh, well, I'm quite confident in myself, and I always kind of wanted to be able to be part of a project that was helping LGBTQ spaces. I felt like there was, because of my journey and because of how I struggled a little bit more than I necessarily would have liked, I feel like I wanted to be able to give back in some way. And it's interesting, you mentioned how some people told you that the project really helped them. It helped me in a slightly different way, obviously, because I'm 33, so I came out when I was 27, 28. So I was still fairly young, but obviously later than a lot of people realised. But I was aware of the project. I was aware all the way through, and it did probably help me come to terms with it, and realising that other people were okay with this sort of with the male form and the male figure, and actually appreciating the male figure a little bit more. And I wanted to be able to share that with other people. So I just thought it would be cool to get involved. And obviously we've had a lot more discussion since then about how that would look. So it was I wouldn't say selfish, definitely, but selfish and selfless. Like, I'd like to be involved for me, but I'd also like to be involved to make a difference.
I think I want every man who takes part to have both those motives. I think it's got to be something that you can see has a benefit for you, and it's got to be not just for you. It's got to be because you care about something bigger than yourself. That's as far as Francis and I got for part one of our podcast before a few technical issues got in the way. So we will be back with part 2, where we talk about being in Africa and so much more. Stay tuned.